Chapter 19 of Devotional Hours with the Bible, Volume 1, by J.R. Miller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne. Chapter 19. Joseph in Prison. Read Genesis chapter 39 and chapter 40, verses 1 to 8. A modern writer has a story entitled Hands Off, which illustrates providence in the life of Joseph. It represents a man in another stage of existence looking down upon Joseph as he is in the hands of the Midianites. Being an active, ingenious young man, Joseph succeeded in escaping from his captors on the first night of his captivity, and he had just reached the outer limits of the camp when a yellow dog barked and awakened his captors, and Joseph was returned to his captivity. But the onlooker wanted to interfere and kill the dog before he had awakened the camp. Then Joseph would have reached home in safety, and great sufferings would have been avoided. But his guardian said, "Hands off." To let him see the evil of his interference, he took him to a world, so the story runs, where he could try his experiment. There he killed the dog. Joseph reached home in safety, his father rejoiced, his brothers were comforted. But when the famine came, there had been no Joseph to lay up the corn. Palestine and Egypt were starved. Great numbers of people died, and the rest were so weakened that they were destroyed by the savage Hittites. Civilization was set back. Egypt was blotted out. Greece and Rome remained in a barbarous state. The whole history of the world was changed, and countless evils came, all because a man in his ignorant wisdom killed a barking dog and saved Joseph from present trouble to his future loss and the world's. We would better keep our hands off God's providences. Many a beautiful plan of his is spoiled by human meddling. Peter wanted to keep Jesus back from his cross. Suppose he had done so, what would have been the result? No doubt, many a time, love has kept a life back from hardships, sacrifice, and suffering, thereby blighting or marring a destiny, a plan of God. We are likely to pity the boy Joseph as we see him enter his period of humiliation, and as we read of his being sold as a slave, then cast into irons. But we see well that if human pity could have rescued him from this sad part of his life, the glorious part that followed, with all its blessed service to the world, would have been lost. His brothers had sold Joseph to the Midianites. They bore him to Egypt and sold him in the market there. He was bought for a handful of money by a prominent man, Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's bodyguard. We can imagine Joseph praying to be rescued from the life to which he seemed destined, but his prayer was not answered. We can see now why it could not be, for the boy was being prepared for high honor and great service in the future. So we find him in Egypt, beginning slave life. Everything about him is new and strange. The contrast between life in the home of Jacob in Canaan and the luxury of one of Egypt's homes was very great. But it was one of the marks of the noble character of Joseph that he was not dependent upon the conditions in which for the time he found himself. He had the fine art of living sweetly anywhere, and of getting the best out of any circumstances. So we read of him that he was successful, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper. In a little while he was overseer over all that his master had. The narrative makes it clear, too, that it was the hand of God that brought about this great prosperity for Joseph. At the same time we know that Joseph had much to do with his own success. If he had been sullen, indolent, bad-tempered, or discourteous, he never would have got on as he did. He never sulked nor grew depressed. He never let the spirit of a slave into his heart. He was as eager to please and make others happy as if he had been in most congenial conditions and circumstances. He was cheerful, hopeful, patient, courteous, kindly, thoughtful, and by these graces and the other good qualities in him he won his way, with the help of God, to favor. Joseph was at school in all these earlier experiences, unconsciously in training for the great work for which he had been brought to Egypt. For one thing, he learned obedience. No one is ready to rule over others who has not himself first learned the lesson of implicit and unquestioning obedience. In this lowly condition he had also acquired much knowledge about the subject classes by being among them, one of them. This knowledge was of great importance to him later when he himself became ruler of Egypt. He could sympathize with those who were oppressed, who were living in hard conditions. Another lesson Joseph learned in these slave days was diligence. Many people in his position would have lost interest in life. He had been cruelly wronged. Potiphar had no right to his services. Why should he then trouble himself to do Potiphar's work particularly well? Why should he do his tasks cheerfully, conscientiously? Why should he take an interest in Potiphar's affairs? But Joseph did not yield to the influence of such feelings. He attended to all his duties as promptly, as punctually, as faithfully, and did all his work as well, and as cheerfully and enthusiastically, as if he had been serving in his own father's house. If all young men who are employed would take this lesson, more of them would rise to something better than they now attain. They often think that the tasks assigned to them are beneath them, and so they take no interest in them. The secret of getting up higher is in doing the lowly things just as if they were royal acts. Men who rise never despise any duty that is assigned to them. The heights by great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night. Another secret of Joseph's success lay in the fact that he did not leave God out of his life. We are not told much about his religious life. Nothing is said of altars and sacrifices or of acts of worship, but evidently Joseph trusted God and followed his conscience and the divine voice in all that he did. He loved God and was faithful to him. The Lord was with him because he obeyed his commandments. We see his loyalty to God in the time of temptation. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Two motives appear in Joseph's resistance to temptation. One was loyalty to his master. Potiphar had trusted him implicitly with all that he had. Could he be guilty of such a base wrong to the man who had placed such confidence in him? To Joseph's mind, such an act would have been basest treachery. The other motive which saved him was his loyalty to God. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Now we see Joseph in a new trouble, again enduring cruel wrong, and again because he has done right. He is in prison, but is not a criminal. We may study his bearing in this period of his humiliation. Even this did not break his spirit. He was in training for a great work for God by and by, and the Lord kept near him all the while. His mind stayed upon God, and God kept him in perfect peace. He was not discouraged. Many people would have given up altogether on finding themselves in such a condition, but Joseph was brave and cheerful. There was a fine optimism in him which kept him always sunny and hopeful. One element of Joseph's nobleness of character in this case appears in his silence under false accusation. His temptress, in her disappointment and anger, charged him to her husband with most dishonorable behavior. Under this accusation Joseph was seized and cast into irons. But he said not a word to Potiphar to free himself and turn suspicion upon the accusing wife. He seems to have thought still of Potiphar's honor, and rather than lay a stain upon it, he would go to the dungeon under the false charge, leaving to God the vindication of his own honor and the proving of his own innocence. It has been said of Joseph, "For his purity you will find his equal, one among 1,000, for his mercy scarcely one." He could have told Potiphar the whole story, but rather than speak, he suffered the dishonoring accusation to rest undenied. Nothing is harder than to live under false charges, which bring upon one suspicion and condemnation, which hinders one's advancement, when by breaking silence one could cast off the false accusation. There are persons who do live thus, bearing reproach and odium to shield others. Joseph had resisted temptation in order to be loyal to Potiphar. Now Potiphar thinks him guilty of the very baseness for which regard of him he had scorned to commit. But in all this Joseph kept his heart clean and loving. Sometimes it costs very dearly to be true to God. Joseph now lay in a dungeon, but his loss through doing right was nothing in comparison with what he would have lost had he done the wickedness to which he was tempted. His prison gloom, deep as it was as noonday compared with what would have been the darkness of his soul under the blight of evil and the bitterness of remorse. The chains that hung about him in his dungeon were but like feathers in comparison with the chains which would have bound his soul had he yielded to the temptation. Though in prison, his feet hurt by fetters, he was a free man because his conscience was free and his heart was pure. It is better to suffer any loss, any cost, any sacrifice, than to sin against God. No fear of consequences should ever drive us to do a wrong thing. Better be hurled down from a high place for doing right than win worldly honor by doing wrong. Better lose our right hand than lose our purity of soul. Better rot in prison than be eaten up by remorse. It was the prayer of a girl queen, written with a diamond point on her castle window, "Keep me pure, make others great." That is the lesson of Joseph's victory over temptation. Anything, dishonor, loss, dungeon, death, before sin. The result of the way Joseph endured the wrong and the hardship of his prison life was that he soon rose to influence and honor, even in the prison. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. There were in Joseph qualities which fitted him for ruling wherever he was. Men seemed naturally to trust him and follow him. He did not seek or claim power. There are some men who do this. They are ambitious to get authority, to have the preeminence. Joseph was not such a man. He was born to rule. So in the prison, as elsewhere, he was soon over everything. One day something happened in the big world above Joseph's prison. It was in the palace of Pharaoh. 2 of the king's officers had offended him, and they were cast into prison. There would have been no need for the record of this bit of court scandal in the Bible were it not that the coming of these officers to the prison has an important bearing upon the after story of Joseph. The men were committed to Joseph's care. He ministered to them, served them, attended to their wants. This contact with the court officers was important also in Joseph's education and training. He learned much from these men which became of use to him when he himself was called to a place near the king. One night each of these men dreamed a dream. Next morning Joseph noticed that they wore a troubled look. He showed his sympathy with them by asking them what troubled them. We should be ready always to be comforters of others when they are in sorrow. When Joseph learned of these men's dream, he was at once interested and offered to help them to interpret the dreams. He had not forgotten his own boyhood dreams. May we not infer also that he still believed in these dreams and regarded them as intimations of his own future? So he became the interpreter of the dream of the butler and the baker. It is a mark of Joseph's piety that he honored God before these heathen men in interpreting their dreams. Do not interpretations belong to God? He asked. It is only as we are interpreters for God that we can be really helpful to others. We have nothing of our own to say to people that will do them any good. But when we can explain and make clear some word of God, which throws light upon their life's duties, perplexities, or mysteries, then do our words become real blessings. It is interesting to notice the connection of the dreams of these officers in the prison with the after story of Joseph. But for these, and Joseph's interpreting of them, he would not have been called out to interpret Pharaoh's dreams 2 years later, and would have missed the great work for which he had been brought to Egypt. When the chief butler left the prison to take his place in the king's service, Joseph asked him to remember him and make mention of him to Pharaoh and secure his release. The butler promised, but the last verse of the chapter says, "Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him." That is the way the gratitude of too many people fades out when its occasion is past. But when we read on into the next chapter, we see it was well for Joseph that the butler did forget him for the time. If he had spoken for him to the king, Joseph might have been released from prison and might have been beyond reach when wanted to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. As it was, however, the butler forgot his friend for 2 years, until the moment when remembering him would do the most for Joseph and for the world. End of chapter 19.